Kaver's beak clicked against the polished table. Elias Clark kept his hands flat and still. To his left, the Thyrex delegate preened a primary feather. The avian's beak was sharp and precise. An asteroid belt hung in the viewport behind them, a dusty sprawl of potential wealth. To Clark's right, the Draxus emissary let out a low, continuous hiss. The vibration from the sound traveled through the floor plates. The reptilian delegate, Eseskth, wanted the belt just as badly as the avian. Kaver spoke with a melodic warble. "The stellar alignments favor our claim. Our astral charts are millennia older." Eseskth rasped, a forked tongue flicking. "Your charts are poetry. Our survey probes have mapped the lithium veins. Possession is precedent." Clark nodded slowly with a small, deliberate motion. He was a slight man. His plain gray suit looked unremarkable. In a room of avian grandeur and reptilian bulk, his human form was meant to be a blank slate. That non-threatening focal point gave him advantage. His perceived irrelevance was his weapon. "Precedent is important," Clark said. His voice was calm and warm. "So is historical documentation. Kaver, your people have legends of that belt from your first stellar migrations. Eseskth, your probes are the first physical touch." He spread his hands. "This is not a problem of right versus wrong. It is a problem of different kinds of right. My role is to help you find a single kind of right you can both profit from." He led them toward a shared mining framework. It required a tedious dance of percentages and timetables. The method was working. The hissing softened. The preening stopped. They were listening. Then the station shuddered. This was not a tremor from the life support systems. It was a deep, groaning vibration. It traveled up through the deck and into the bones. The lights flickered, dipping into a brief, ominous crimson before restoring themselves. On the viewport, the starfield tilted. The station's stabilizers fought a sudden, massive gravitational pull. A new ship slid into view. It was a dagger of dark, angular rock. Its hull seemed carved from a single mountain. No running lights adorned it. Only the dull gleam of mineral strata caught the distant sun. The warship was a Quartzar stonehull design feared across this sector. It dwarfed the elegant avian clippers and the blocky Draxus dredgers. With a final, stomach-lurching thud, it anchored itself to a heavy docking spur. Its weight made the entire Crossroads station list slightly. The chamber doors hissed open. The sound was not a request for entry. It was the sound of overriding authority. A being of moving, polished stone entered. Its body was a humanoid mass of interlocking quartz and basalt segments. Each segment ground with a low, seismic sound as it moved. Light glinted from 1,000 fractured planes across its torso. Its head was a smooth obsidian helmet with no visible features. Only a deep, internal glow pulsed like magma. This was Zalthus of the Quartzar Dominion. His name was a grating vibration in the air. He did not sit. He stood at the head of the table. He was a geological event in the shape of a warlord. His vocalization was the sound of continents colliding. A hidden emitter translated it into harsh, comprehensible words. "The silicate field you designate Belt Kappa 77 is claimed by the Quartzar Dominion. Your claims are void. Your presence is tolerated only for your immediate departure." Kaver's feathers flattened against his body. Eseskth coiled back in a defensive posture. The Quartzar were silicon-based. Their minds were as rigid and brutal as their bodies. They practiced tectonic warfare, triggering quakes and volcanic eruptions to scour whole continents. Arguing with one was like arguing with an earthquake. Kaver chirped, though the melody was gone. A thin warble of fear replaced it. "By what right?" Zalthus turned his glowing gaze upon the avian. "By the right of the Earthbreaker." He gestured a stony hand toward the viewport. "By the right of the singularity cannon it mounts. Your organic vessels are kindling. Your claims are whispers. Leave." Eseskth hissed. It was a sound of defeat. The Draxus were territorial, but they were not suicidal. The Quartzar warship was a weapon of a different tier. It was a tool for extermination, not negotiation. The reptilian delegate rose. He gave a curt, jerky nod to Clark, then to Kaver. Without another word, he slithered from the room. Kaver stared at the asteroid belt, then at the stonehull Leviathan blocking his view. With a shudder, he too departed. His proud crest was now limp. In 6 sentences, Zalthus had obliterated 6 hours of careful mediation. The Quartzar warlord turned that featureless, glowing regard on Clark. The grinding voice held a note of pure, distilled contempt. "You, soft-shelled ephemeral, your function here is concluded. Your species' irrelevance is noted." Then he left. His steps left faint scratches on the deck plating. The chamber doors sealed. Clark remained alone in the sudden, hollow silence. He did not move, he did not slump or swear. He simply sat with his flat hands still on the table. The table was now cold. The hum of the station's systems felt like a mockery. He watched through the viewport. First the Draxus dredger, then the Thyrex clipper detached from their docks. They fled into the void. The Quartzar stone hull, the Earthbreaker, remained. It was a permanent, brutal period at the end of a failed sentence. Professional humiliation settled in his gut like a cold pool. He had been hired to build a bridge. A warlord had vaporized the canyon. His clients, who had at least respected the process, had been bullied into silence. His neutrality had been rendered a joke. The Quartzar saw no value in brokers, in words, in deals. They saw only mass and force and obedience. The cold pool began to curdle. It thickened into a hard, sharp knot of resolve. This was not the hot anger of a soldier. Elias Clark was no soldier. He understood systems. He understood pressure points. He understood that leverage came in forms a quartz-born mind might never perceive. He finally stood. He walked to the viewport. The Earthbreaker was a masterpiece of brutal engineering. Its power source would be a void reactor, a monstrous thing that bled energy from other dimensions. That power fed its primary weapon, a singularity cannon. The technical briefings flashed in his mind. Massive power draw, friendly fire risk, catastrophic meltdown if breached. Standard galactic knowledge, a list of specifications. Clark saw something else. He saw a hammer. The Quartzar had just taught him that every problem looked like a nail. Soft-shelled ephemeral, he repeated quietly. His breath fogged the glass. He was not made of stone. He could bend. He could think in ways that rigid crystalline logic could not follow. A reactor was just a power source. A cannon was just a tool. And tools, as humanity had always known, could be used for jobs their makers never intended. He turned from the viewport. The ghost of his own reflection, a pale, fragile thing, was superimposed over the dark rock of the warship. The humiliation was gone. It was burned away by a new and chilling focus. The Quartzar had made it personal. More importantly, they had made it simple. They had shown him the hammer. Now he just needed to find the right nail. Warlord Zalthus strode from the umbilical corridor into the warship's command spire. His granite feet struck the deck with the finality of a tomb seal closing. The viewing chamber was a hollowed geode. Its walls were a jagged mosaic of dark crystal. The cold light of distant stars refracted through them. Here, the silence had weight and texture. It held a mineral patience. His second car stood waiting. Car was a younger spire of obsidian and quartz. His form was etched with the fine fractures of 100 campaigns. He did not bow. Among the Quartzar, posture was hierarchy enough. Carr spoke. His voice was a low grind of tectonic plates. The avian and the scaled one fled like vapor on solar wind. Their fear was efficient, but the human, you shamed it. I calculate minimal tactical return from that interaction. Zalthus moved to the primary viewport. It was a single sheet of flawless crystal 10 meters high. The Crossroads station hung in the void beyond. It was a tangled knot of organic spires and bioluminescent pods. It looked like a sickly, phosphorescent coral reef. To his eyes, it was an offense against the solid order of the universe. You mistake the action, Zalthus replied. He did not turn. The shame was not the tool, it was the measurement. He let the concept hang in the air. It was a test for his second. The Quartzar mind worked in superposition logic. It held multiple strategic states at once until observation forced a single, brutal outcome. Zalthus had observed the human. Its reaction had collapsed into a predictable state, shock, then a futile attempt to stand firm. It was a weak variable. Carr processed this. The facets of his ocular crystals shifted with a soft click. You measured its resilience. Its lack, Zalthus corrected. They are all water and whispers, these younger species. They build with flesh and call it technology. They speak of treaties as if words were fortifications. He gestured a stony hand toward the station. That thing they live in is grown, not forged. A biotech vessel large scale, it breathes. It can be poisoned, it can feel fear. A deep subsonic hum vibrated through the deck. It was the void reactor below them. It was a contained dimensional bleed that fed the ship's monstrous heart. The power was immense, stable, and unforgiving. It was the opposite of the station's pulsing, vulnerable life. Carr stated the human's role is broker, neutral ground. Its perceived irrelevance is its shield. Its irrelevance is our door, Zalthus said. He finally turned. His gaze was like twin boreholes. The depth-born are aquatic, territorial, and entrenched. A direct assault on their liquid world would be costly, even for the Earthbreaker. Carr's crystalline structure emitted a faint, appreciative shimmer. Zalthus continued. His voice dropped to a grinding whisper. They hold the K7 system. Its inner world has a core of condensed stellar metal, a load that makes this asteroid belt seem like dust. You require a forward base, a closer point from which to project threat, Carr deduced. The Crossroads is perfectly positioned. It is a hub of minor traffic, a place of ignored comings and goings, and it is soft. Zalthus leaned forward. The light caught the volcanic glass seams in his arms. We will not conquer it, we will persuade it. The human Clark will grant us logistical support, docking privileges, resource transfers, sensor blind spots. He will do this to avoid annihilation. He will tell himself it is a temporary concession to save his station. And when the Dipth-born trace our presence back to this neutral hub, Zalthus emitted a sound. It was the rough equivalent of a laugh, a cascade of grinding pebbles. Then the Dipth-born will attack the human station. They will see a Quartzar ally, not a hostage. The conflict will consume this sector. And from the chaos, we will take the core of K7 while our enemies are busy breaking each other's frail ships. It was a clean, ruthless calculus. The station was a lever. The human was the hand that would, under pressure, push that lever for them. Carr asked, and the human's own fleet. Their capabilities are largely unknown. They have had faster-than-light travel for less than 20 stellar cycles, Zalthus dismissed. They arrive in ships of woven cellulose and reinforced sinew, flesh vessels. One precise strike from our primary weapon would not just destroy such a ship, it would unravel it. He gestured to a hololith that shimmered to life between them. It displayed a schematic of the tectonic charge drill. The weapon was a nightmare of applied gravity physics. It was designed to fire a focused singularity pulse into a planetary body. The pulse would travel to the core. It would resonate and trigger catastrophic geological upheaval. It was a world killer. Against a biological ship, the effects would be more grotesque. The weapon would twist and compress organic matter at a cellular level. Carr confirmed, the drill is primed. The void reactor can sustain 2 full-power discharges before requiring a lengthy cooldown cycle. A third would risk a catastrophic meltdown. One will be enough for the Dipth-born world, for the demonstration. Zalthus watched a small human transport. It looked like a gleaming seed pod. It detached from the station and skittered away. The human saw only a warlord claiming a belt. He does not see the true target. He cannot. His mind is not shaped for deep strata. It skims the surface like wind. He turned his back on the viewport, the station, the entire feeble drama. The meeting was already a closed equation in his mind. Zalthus commanded, send the formal request to Station Administrator Elias Clark. List our required accommodations. Frame it as a reasonable fee for our continued peaceful oversight of the sector. Let him wrestle with the fiction of choice. Carr gave a single sharp nod. The sound was like cracking stone. He will comply. He is already handled. A minor variable. Zalthus looked toward the deep void. The K7 system lay hidden behind the glare of a nebula. His thoughts were already there. He was focused on the solid, metallic prize waiting in the dark. Prepare the drill. We will need a demonstration soon. Something to ensure the Dipth-born are watching, and to remind the human of the texture of true power. The command spire settled into a deeper, more purposeful silence. It was the silence of stone. It was patient and immovable, waiting for softer things to break themselves against it. Elias Clark let the silence settle. The scent of ozone and avian musk still hung in the air. But the fear was gone, burned away by a cold, clarifying anger. He watched the last of the Quartzar honor guard disappear into the access corridor. The guard was a hulking silhouette of polished basalt. They had not even bothered to post a guard. To Zalthus, he was not a threat. He was furniture. That was the opening. Clark did not clean up the scattered data slates. He did not right the toppled chair. He walked to the viewport. His steps echoed in the vast, empty room. The Earthbreaker hung against the starfield. It was a jagged mountain of weaponized geology. The asteroid belt gleamed innocently beyond it. The prize, the feint. It felt obvious now in the brutal clarity left in the Warlord's wake. A predator that large did not stir from the depths of Quartzar space for rocks. It came for a kill. He activated his personal comm. The device was a slim piece of human manufacture. Its signal was encrypted with a shifting cipher. One of his early clients, a fugitive code shaper, had designed that cipher as payment. His first call was not for ships or soldiers. It was for ghosts. The Sporement fungal network was notoriously indifferent to the politics of motile beings. Their consciousness was a vast, slow mycelium spanning asteroids and derelicts. They were interested only in information patterns and thermal gradients. Clark had once helped arbitrate a dispute between a Sporement tendril and a mining guild. The guild had accidentally severed one of its data-collecting hyphae. The settlement had been paid in complex chemical formulas and a standing favor. He called it in now. His request was simple. Any sensor echoes, any energy signatures, any whispers of Quartzar fleet movements near the liquid world of Pelagos over the last 3 standard cycles. The response was not words. It was a data packet. It was dry and scentless as spores. It deposited itself in his secure buffer. The packet contained gravitational anomalies and deep-spectrum sonar pings. These were the kind used to map ocean floors from orbit. The Quartzar had been surveying Pelagos, the dip-born homeworld, with meticulous, silent intensity. His next call was to the chronodrift scavengers. They were temporal opportunists. They skimmed the edges of causality for salvage from might-have-beens and near-future wrecks. Their information was unreliable, a haze of probabilistic echoes, but they saw patterns in the chaos of what could be. He bought a bundle of their drift logs. He paid with a promise of future first access to any interesting debris that might soon appear in the Crossroads vicinity. The logs were a confusing tapestry of fractured images and garbled comms traffic. But one echo was clear, a massive gravity wave event. It had a signature like a dying star. That signature was superimposed over a schematic of the Crossroads station itself. It was a possible future, a catastrophic one. Clark pieced it together in his quarters. The data flowed across his wall screen. The asteroid negotiations had been theater. They were a loud, obvious play for a minor resource. Their purpose was to draw the sector's eye. Meanwhile, Zalthus's true target floated. It was a world of endless ocean covering a core of rare stellar metals. The Dipborn were reclusive, territorial. They possessed a deep-bore navy. That navy could give even the Quartzar pause in a straight fight, so Zalthus would not fight straight. He needed a forward base, a place to stage and repair and lure, somewhere soft, somewhere neutral. Somewhere like Crossroads. The station was a civilian hub. It was a delicate bubble of biotech and diplomacy. Its defenses were a joke. A few point defense lasers to deter micrometeoroids. It could not fight the Earthbreaker, but Clark was not a soldier. He was a broker. His weapon was consequence. He pulled up the station's public engineering schematics. Then he used his mediator's clearance to dive deeper. The heart of Crossroads was its void reactor. The technology was Tier 6. It was a gift from a long-gone patron species. It was a gentle giant, tapping a fissure between dimensions. It bled off limitless, stable power for life support and gravity and light. The safety protocols were exhaustive, 1,000 pages of fail-safes and containment procedures. Clark ignored the operations manual. He went straight to the catastrophic meltdown scenario. The principle was terrifyingly simple. If the dimensional containment field was ruptured while the reactor was at full draw, the bleed would become a hemorrhage. Reality would ulcerate at the point of breach. The resulting energy release would not be an explosion in the conventional sense. It would be a localized unraveling. It would be a persistent and violent eruption of raw physics. That eruption would swallow anything nearby. It would render the area toxic to normal space for centuries. The safety docs called it a zero zone. He cross-referenced with the station's industrial sector. The fabricator bays were designed for peace. They could print engine components for freighters, medical supplies, luxury goods. Their matter libraries held the atomic patterns for durasteel, ceramic composites, biopolymer. And for specialized mining and construction applications, they held the pattern for shaped gravimetric charges. These were mining tools. They were designed to fracture asteroid cores with precise gravity pulses. They felt like a deep, subsonic thrum in the hands. Clark leaned back. The air in his room felt thin. The idea forming in his mind was not one of defense. It was of profound, irreversible vandalism. He was not planning to save Crossroads. He was planning to poison the well. A sane species would never consider it. The risk was astronomical. The outcome was a blasphemy against the very concept of sanctuary. But Clark's species had a long, dark history of taking tools of creation and forging them into threats. A plane was for travel, until it was a missile. A reactor was for power, until it was a bomb. He could not rig the station to explode. That would just leave debris. He had to rig it to malfunction, spectacularly and permanently, at the precise moment of Quartzar takeover. He needed to turn the void reactor into a tripwire. He needed the station's own fabricators to become the machine that built the trigger. He stood up. His body moved before the full weight of the madness settled. He had to see the reactor chamber. The access tunnel was a wide, softly lit artery leading to the station's core. The air grew warmer. It hummed with a deep, subaudible frequency that vibrated in his teeth. The void reactor was not a machine in any human sense. It was a contained absence. It was a sphere of perfect blackness 50 meters across, held in a lattice of silver energy. There were no moving parts, no roar of engines, just the silent, awful hunger of something drinking from a universe that was not this one. The containment field shimmered around it. It was a complex weave of forces that made the light bend sickeningly at the edges. Clark's eyes went not to the reactor, but to the conduits. Massive crystalline pipes channeled the harnessed power out to the station, and there at the primary juncture was the emergency blowout panel. It was a manual release. It was a last-ditch safeguard to vent a containment breach into space before it could feed back into the core. It was meant to save the station. His plan would pervert it into a detonator. He returned to his quarters. His mind raced with schematics and probabilities. He needed a grav charge precisely shaped. The charge was not meant to destroy the blowout panel. It was meant to jam it open at the critical moment. At the same time, he needed to overload the main power conduit with a feedback pulse. The fabricators could make the charge. His mediators' codes could get him the raw materials. He would log it as a structural stress test for the docking pylons. The installation would be the hard part. It would require a reactor shutdown, or at least a massive power diversion. It would require an opportunity. He knew how to create one. Clark sat at his comm console. He composed a message. He did not use the secure channel. He used the standard diplomatic band. It was addressed to the depth-born conclave on Pelagos. The encryption was good but not unbreakable. He wanted it intercepted. "Esteemed conclave," he began. His voice was calm in the recording. "This is Elias Clark, neutral mediator aboard Crossroads station. I have credible information regarding an imminent Quartzar Dominion threat to your sovereign space. The Warlord Zalthus intends to use this station as a forward base for an assault on Pelagos to seize your planetary core. The pretext will be a false flag attack. They will likely blame it on you. I am attempting to secure evidence. Be vigilant. Do not trust any provocation originating from Crossroads." He sent it. It was a flare shot into the dark. The depth-born might believe it, they might not, but Zalthus's surveillance would catch it. The Warlord would know Clark had pieced the plan together. He would know the human was not cowed. A predator confronted by a nuisance that reveals its hunt has two choices: abandon the hunt or eliminate the nuisance. Clark was betting everything on the Quartzar's pride. Zalthus would come to him. He would come to silence him. He would seize control of the station personally and ahead of schedule. That would be the moment of chaos. That would be the shutdown for security reasons. That would be the opportunity. He closed his eyes. The image of the void reactor, that pocket of infinite black, swam behind his lids. He was not a hero making a stand. He was a man in a room full of priceless art. He was preparing to smash every vase and light the curtains on fire because a killer was at the door. The cost of his creative improvisation would be the total sacrifice of the very neutrality he was sworn to uphold. He opened his eyes. He began to draft the work order for the fabricator bay. The title was bland: Docking Pylon Structural Integrity Test Charge Fabrication. The warfare of information was over. The warfare of consequences had begun. He was going to make Crossroads the most toxic piece of real estate in the sector. Zalthus stood at the command plinth. His stone fingers traced the tactical glyphs floating in the air. The data stream was a river of certainty. His interceptors had captured the human's transmission mere moments after it left the station. It was a frantic, poorly encrypted warning sent to the depth-born enclave on Pelagos. It begged for aid and detailed the Quartzar battle plan. It was so obvious it was almost insulting. Zalthus let out a low rumble. The sound began deep within his chest. It was a vibration of shifting mineral plates. It rose into a grating, percussive laugh that echoed through the chamber. His second, Carr, turned his faceted head. The light of the holographic displays caught in his crystalline eyes. Zalthus spoke. His voice was like a rock slide. "The soft-skinned broker, he thinks he is clever, he thinks he can warn the fish." He clenched a fist. The sound of grinding stone punctuated his contempt. His defiance is a child throwing pebbles at a mountain. It is predictable. It is pathetic. He watched the organic shape of the Crossroads station on the main viewer. It hung against the starfield. It looked like a bloated, intricate seed pod. His earlier assessment held. It was soft. It was vulnerable. And now it was an annoyance that needed to be removed from the board ahead of schedule. Zalthus declared, "We accelerate." The glyphs under his hands dissolved and reformed into new attack vectors. "The depth-born will have received the warning. They will mobilize, but they are slow. We will take their forward observation post first." He gestured a thick arm toward the station. "We seize the Crossroads. We use its docks for our assault craft. Then we crush Pelagos before their fleets can fully gather. The Earthbreaker pivoted with a silent, massive grace. Its thrusters painted brief lines of blue plasma against the dark. It moved to block the station's primary launch lanes. A wall of dark alloy and weapon spines settled into a blockade position. From this vantage, the station looked even more defenseless. Zalthus's sensor lieutenants chimed reports. Their forms were like statues of basalt wired with light. They spoke in a staccato language. One stated, "No weapon emplacements detected." Its voice was a click of quartz plates. Another added, "Shield integrity remains at civilian grade. No upgrades, biotech signatures minimal, human vessels departing." Zalthus focused the viewer on the few ships scrambling to escape. They were human designs. Their hulls were grown from chitinous organic compounds. The compounds flowed into elegant, wing-like shapes. The ships looked like delicate sea creatures fluttering away from a predator. They were no threat. They were evidence of panic. Zalthus commanded, "A warning. Let them understand the cost of defiance. Target the largest of the fleeing vessels. Use the primary singularity cannon." The weapon was a masterpiece of brutal physics. It did not fire plasma or projectile. It gathered impossible energies to forge a temporary artificial gravity well. It was a crushing fist of spacetime itself. On the bridge, a deep subsonic thrum vibrated through the stone deck. A sphere of distorted darkness shot from the Earthbreaker's main spine. It was a hole in the light. It traveled silently. It touched the leading human biotech ship. The effect was not an explosion. It was an unraveling. The ship's graceful form contorted. It stretched into an impossible line. Then it collapsed inward upon itself. It ended in a silent, violent spasm of shattered biology and metal. Debris pinwheeled away, slow and final. Zalthus watched the destruction coolly. This was a language every species understood. It was the grammar of force. It was the punctuation of annihilation. The remaining human ships scattered like frightened insects. But the station itself lay quiet, dark, and seemingly docile. Zalthus said, "Transmit the ultimatum. Surrender all administrative control of the station. Open all docks to our boarding parties. Compliance will be met with efficiency. Resistance will be met with shattering." The message pulsed toward the Crossroads on a dozen channels. The bridge fell into a waiting silence. The only sound was the low hum of the void reactor deep in the Earthbreaker's heart. Zalthus expected the human's voice, laced with fear. He expected a plea or a furious, impotent denial. What arrived was a single data packet. It was a line of text routed through a simple, open channel. It appeared on a secondary display. Carr read it aloud. His tone was flat with confusion. "It says, you should have taken the deal." Zalthus stared at the words. For a long moment there was no sound. The deal? The pathetic little bargain over asteroids he had obliterated with his mere presence. Was the human's mind broken? Was this some final, feeble attempt at bravado? A low chime echoed from the main sensor station, then another, then a cascade of them. The alarms painted the bridge in pulses of urgent amber light, a rising chorus of alerts. A lieutenant clicked energy spike. "Massive, source is the Crossroads station, central power core." Carr turned from the viewer. "It is overloading. Their reactor is going critical. They are destroying themselves." Zalthus leaned forward. His crystalline eyes narrowed. The data stream was wrong. This was not a simple meltdown. The energy curve was too sharp, too controlled. The spike was not a chaotic surge. It was a deliberate, steep climb. It bypassed every safety threshold. Zalthus grated, "No, it is being pushed." The sensor lieutenant confirmed. Its clicks were rapid now. "The overload is cascading, but the pattern is directed. External containment fields are being reinforced, not released. The safety governors have been manually overridden. They are jury-rigged to fail in sequence." On the viewer, the Crossroads station no longer looked like a soft seed pod. Against the sudden, terrifying brilliance erupting from its core, it looked like a thorn. It was a dark silhouette backlit by a star being born in its belly. The void reactor was not exploding outward. It was being forced inward, into a state no sane engineer would ever conceive. Zalthus understood then. The human's defiance was not pathetic. It was not a pebble. It was a scalpel. Clark had not tried to fight the Quartzar fleet. He had not tried to run. He had looked at the single most powerful piece of technology on the station. It was an engine meant to power lights and life support. He had seen a weapon. He had taken a tool for creation and had bent it. He had bent it with horrific, improvisational genius into a tool for annihilation. The human's calm text echoed in Zalthus's mind. "You should have taken the deal." This was not a plea, it was an epitaph. Zalthus roared, the grinding command tore from him. All power to shields, reverse thrust, get us away from that station. But it was already too late. The light from the Crossroads was not light anymore. It was a hole. It was a hungry, spreading stain of non-space. It was a zero zone blooming silently and forever where the station had been. The Earthbreaker's mighty engines flared, but space itself was falling into that newborn scar. The warning shot from the singularity cannon had been a tiny, temporary gravity well. Clark had just created a permanent one. The station screamed. Elias Clark moved through the reactor control room with a kind of frantic grace. His hands flew across the main console. He overrode safety protocols with codes he had pulled from the deepest, most forgotten engineering archives. The air itself vibrated. A deep hum climbed through the bones of his feet and settled in his teeth. It was the sound of potential. It was the sound of a universe held in a fragile, trembling balance. He had not been idle in the hours since Zalthus's blockade. The station's industrial fabricators, meant for crafting spare parts and diplomatic gifts, had word to a different purpose. Scattered around the cavernous reactor chamber below him were his creations. They were a dozen crude, blocky injectors. They were ugly things, all welded seams and mismatched piping. But their purpose was singular. They were high-capacity coolant pumps. Each one was jury-rigged to draw from the station's emergency reserves. He had routed every single line directly into the heart of the void reactor. His plan was not destruction, it was perversion. The reactor was a Tier 6 marvel. It was a power source that tapped energy from a pinprick bleed between dimensions. Under normal operation, that bleed was meticulously contained. The harvested energy was filtered and stabilized. Clark's calculations, scrawled on a transparent data slate now smudged with his fingerprints, aimed for something else. He would force-feed the core a massive, sustained overdose of its own stabilizing coolant. The theory buried in a footnote of a safety manual suggested this would not douse the reaction. It would hyperstimulate it. It would cause a dimensional bleed event, a controlled meltdown. A final alarm joined the chorus. It was a piercing shriek that denoted a core integrity violation. Clark did not hesitate. He sent the command. For a moment, nothing happened. The hum deepened. It became a groan. Then a wave of force, silent and immense, slammed through the station. Gravity flickered. The force threw him against his console. His ribs barked in protest. Lights died. Then they surged back in a frantic, stuttering strobe. The primary illumination was gone. It was replaced by the hellish, pulsing glow now emanating from the reactor chamber itself. Outside the station, space began to fracture. It started at the edges of the Crossroads. A shimmer like heat haze over a desert appeared. Then the shimmer deepened. It thickened into a vortex of impossible colors. Unlight flickered at its heart. It was a negative radiance that hurt the eyes to look upon. It was a void that was somehow brighter than black. It swirled and bled. It wrapped the organic curves of the station in a poisonous, crawling aurora. The light did not illuminate. It devoured clarity. It turned the stars behind it into smeared, sickly ghosts. Clark stumbled to an observation blister. He hauled on his environment suit. The seals hissed tight. He needed to see. The suit's visor automatically polarized. It fought to make sense of the chaos. His station was gone. In its place hung a fortress of madness. It was wreathed in the leaking energy of a wounded dimension. He knew what this radiation did. The safety manuals had been very clear in their dry, technical way. It scrambled quantum mind systems. It introduced cascading observation errors. These errors would collapse any logic based on superposition. The radiation made physical matter unstable. It whispered to atomic bonds until they forgot how to hold. It was a zone where certainty died. A spear of distorted gravity lanced out from the Quartzar warship. The singularity cannon had fired again. Clark watched. His breath fogged the visor. The projectile, a knot of devastating mass, hit the edge of the shimmering aurora. It did not explode. It distorted. It stretched like taffy into a long, thin smear of twisted light. Then, with a silent flash of that same awful unlight, it vanished. The projectile was swallowed into the bleed. No weapon could cross that barrier. Nothing bound by conventional physics could survive it. He had not made a bomb. He had made a moat. Inside the suit, the only sound was his own ragged breathing and the faint whir of its recycler. The triumph he had expected did not come. The fiery satisfaction of defiance did not come. It had evaporated the moment the reactor crossed the threshold. In its place was a hollow, ringing exhaustion. He leaned his helmet against the cold transparency of the viewport. He stared into the chaotic light. His legs felt weak. He had done it. He had stopped Zalthus. He had protected the depth-born. He had saved Crossroads from becoming a weapon. He had rendered the Quartzar's terrifying warship impotent, and he had sealed himself inside. The station was now the only stable point within the bleeding zone. To leave its shielded interior was to be dissolved into the dimensional static. To turn off the reactor was impossible. The feedback loops he had created were irreversible. The Crossroads was no longer a diplomatic hub. It was a prison of his own design. It was a lifeboat adrift in a sea of insanity. He was the warden and the sole inmate. A communication alert chimed weakly in his helmet. It was a signal fighting through the interference. It was an audio-only channel. It was thick with static that sounded like screaming glass. Through it, he heard Zalthus's voice. The grating, stone-on-stone confidence was gone. It was replaced by a fury so cold it burned. "Human," the word was a curse. "What have you done?" Clark took a long moment before he keyed his mic. His own voice sounded thin, worn out. "I took the station off the board." Zalthus spat. "This is not a weapon, this is pollution, a coward's shield." Clark corrected. His eyes were still on the flickering unlight. "It's a barrier, you can't attack through it. Your cannon is useless, your quantum navigation is blind. You can't use my home as your staging ground. The deal is void." A hiss of static. "You have trapped yourself. You will die in there slowly. Your organic station will rot around you. This is a victory of madness, not strength." "I know," Clark's reply was simple, final. The truth of it settled in his gut like a stone. He had traded a quick death under a singularity projectile for a slow, lonely end inside a glittering cage. But it was a trade that mattered. The Dipth-born would live. The Quartzar plan was shattered. Zalthus's voice rose. The fury broke through. "You are a fool. You had no right. This power is not for your kind to wield. You break the tools you do not understand." Clark murmured almost to himself, "We're good at that." Then louder, "The barrier is stable. It is not expanding. It will remain right here around this station for a very, very long time. Your path to Pelagos is closed. Find another route." The channel went dead. A blast of pure interference from the bleed severed it. Clark was alone again with the hum and the flicker. He pushed himself away from the viewport. The suit felt impossibly heavy. He had work to do. The station's internal systems were failing. They were dancing to the tune of the dimensional leak. Life support was on backups. The artificial gravity generators were glitching. They caused random, dizzying shifts in weight. He was the only crew left. He made his way back toward the control room. He moved through corridors now painted in the ever-shifting, sickly light of his creation. Shadows did not behave correctly here. They moved independently. They stretched toward sources of nothing. The air, even within the suit, carried a faint, metallic taste the filters could not scrub. He reached his quarters. It was a small space. Once it had been neutral and tidy. Now it was a refuge. He sealed the door. He engaged the manual physical locks. Only here with the main lights off and only a single battery-powered lamp glowing did the external chaos feel muted. He disconnected his helmet with a hiss. The air was cool, stale. On a small desk sat the other part of his plan. It was next to a framed image of a green, cloud-dotted planet he had not seen in 3 standard years. The object was a simple, sturdy data core. It was shielded against EMP and radiation. It contained the full record of everything: Zalthus's threats, the intercepted Quartzar battle plans, the schematics of the Earthbreaker, and his own final log entries explaining what he had done and why. It was a testament. It was a warning. It was a plea for someone, someday, to understand. He had built a launcher for it. It was a small pneumatic tube rooted to an exterior maintenance hatch on the station's shielded underbelly. It would fire the core on a ballistic course away from the bleed zone. It was a tiny, tough seed cast into the stellar wind. It would take years, perhaps decades, to be found, but it would be found. He set the launch sequence on a timer. He did not want to be conscious for it. The act felt too much like a last breath. Sitting on the edge of his bunk, Elias Clark finally allowed the stillness to claim him. The adrenaline was gone. It left a vast and empty fatigue. He had been a broker, a mediator, a man who built bridges with words. Now he was the man who had burned the only bridge he had. He had marooned himself on an island of his own making. He had done it to keep a monster from crossing. He looked at his hands. They were pale in the lamplight. They had typed treaties. They had wired explosive coolant lines. They were the same hands. Outside, the unlight flickered against his window. It painted the room in silent, chaotic strokes. He was not triumphant. He was exhausted. He had made himself a prisoner. He was an immovable object in the path of a ruthless force. As the deep, wrong hum of the wounded reactor vibrated through the deck, he knew the price was only beginning to be paid. The fortress was complete. Now he had to live in it. Alarms shrieked in dissonant, grinding harmonics. The sound was like stone shearing under impossible pressure. Warlord Zalthus stood at the command dais. His crystalline fists were clenched so tightly that hairline fractures spread like frost across his knuckles. The view through the main port was a lie. Where the organic sprawl of Crossroads station should have been, there now churned a silent, shimmering aurora. It pulsed with sickly colors that had no name in the Quartzar spectrum. It was a bruise upon the black. Zalthus commanded, "Report." His voice was a low avalanche. His second car stood before a flickering tactical slate. The stone of the console itself seemed to waver. Its edges bled into a faint quantum haze. Carr said, "The anomaly is a dimensional bleed. It is emitting chaotic spatial harmonics. Our quantum mind targeting arrays cannot resolve a solution. They perceive infinite possible positions for the station. The logic collapses under observation." Zalthus felt a profound wrongness in his own hull. For a fleeting, nauseating moment, the obsidian deck beneath his feet lost its certainty. It did not tremble. It suggested it might tremble. It was the feeling of solid stone forgetting for a single instant that it was solid. This was not warfare. This was suicide. It was insanity. No sane species would cripple its own home to forge a shield. A junior tactician turned from his station. His crystal form flickered with stress glyphs. "Warlord, long-range passive scanners are clear. We detect a fleet mobilization at the system's edge, dipth-borne signatures. They have answered the human's warning." A new kind of cold settled in Zalthus's core. He turned from the maddening aurora. The dipth-borne were not powerful enough to challenge the Earthbreaker in a straight fight. But the Earthbreaker was no longer a predator in open void. It was a beast caught in a thicket of poisoned thorns. Carr confirmed his fears. Attempting to enter the bleed zone would risk our void reactor sympathetically destabilizing. We are immobilized. Retreat was the only logical option. It was a tactical withdrawal to clear space and recalibrate. But retreat was not a maneuver. For a Quartzar warlord, it was a tectonic shock to his reputation. It was an admission. A creature of soft flesh and weaker stone had outmaneuvered him. It would echo in the courts of the Dominion. It would be a permanent flaw in his record. Carr said quietly. His gaze was also locked on the aurora. "They fight by breaking their own tools. They poison their own den to keep the hunter out. No sane species would consider it." Zalthus did not answer. He ordered, his voice devoid of its earlier contempt, "Bring me the human's file." A slate was produced. Zalthus scrolled through the brief, insultingly sparse dossier. Elias Clark, mediator, broker, no military history. He had looked at the being with contempt. Now he saw the calm that had faced him in the negotiation chamber as a precursor to this. The human had not been unafraid. He had been calculating. The tactician announced, "The dipth-borne fleet is beginning a slow advance. They are spreading into a wide envelopment pattern." The choice was upon him. Fight a capable enemy while partially blind with a universe-rending anomaly at his back, or order the retreat. Zalthus turned his back on the aurora. The words ground from him like boulders. "Signal the dipth-borne fleet commander. Declare a temporary cessation of hostilities due to environmental hazards. Then plot a withdrawal vector. Take us to the system's gravitational margin." Slowly. A wave of shock passed through the bridge. It was unvoiced but palpable. They had never heard such an order from him. Carr merely nodded, his own relief hidden behind a mask of duty. He began issuing commands. As the great warship began its humiliating, careful retreat, Zalthus remained on the dais. He did not watch the dipth-borne fleet grow bolder in his scanners. He stared instead at the human's file. The contempt was gone. It had burned away in the aurora's chaotic light. In its place was a cold, new understanding. This was not a species to be conquered or shamed. They were too volatile. They saw tools not for their purpose, but for their potential as weapons. They would even turn those weapons against themselves. It was not strength. It was a profound, terrifying madness. And as the Earthbreaker pulled away from the shimmering scar that had been a tactical objective, Zalthus felt the first true flicker of dread in a millennium. Humanity was not weak. They were simply catastrophically unpredictable. The dipth-borne fleet held its position, a silent aquatic threat in the deep dark. Their ships, shaped like abyssal predators, watched the Earthbreaker turn. Humiliated, the great Quartzar warship powered its drive. Zalthus broadcast one final message across the system, not of threat, but of stark, cold recognition. The transmission was raw, unfiltered by diplomatic niceties. "You are not weak. You are deranged. Your space is cursed." The Quartzar warship then fled into the void. The crisis was over. Crossroads Station was no longer a hub of commerce, but a fading, lethal scar in reality. Days later, new ships arrived. They were human. Their organic hulls, grown from resilient starkelp and adaptive biopolymers, seemed to ripple. They were adapted to filter the residual bleed, navigating the chaotic energies with an unnerving ease. They found Elias Clark alive amidst the flickering madness of the station. He was debriefed by a stunned human admiral aboard the flagship, a vessel that smelled of wet earth and ozone. The admiral, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much void, studied him. "You had no authorized weapons, no fleet. How?" Clark looked at his hands, still smudged with coolant residue. "I didn't have a weapon, so I used a power source. I didn't have an army, so I used physics." The admiral leaned forward. Her voice was quiet. "We ran the simulations. You had a 94% chance of being annihilated in the initial overload. Did you know you could die?" A faint smile touched Clark's lips. Zalthus's first mistake was thinking a broker's only currency is words. His second was thinking a human needs a sanctioned weapon to fight back. News of the Crossroads incident spread through the galactic networks like a shockwave. The Dipth-born, in a gesture of profound gratitude, affirmed a formal alliance with humanity. The Thyrex and the Draxis, seeing this new power dynamic, quietly reopened negotiations for Belt Kappa 77, this time with human observers at the table. The Quartzar Dominion did not declare war. To do so would be to admit one of their greatest warlords was rooted by a single unarmed civilian. Instead, they issued a new navigational directive. All charts were updated. Human-claimed space was reclassified, its designation changed from undeveloped to a new, unique category: hazardous cognitive zone. The galaxy's view of humanity shifted. They were no longer a weak unknown. They were dangerously, terrifyingly unpredictable. Months later, Clark stood in the rebuilt observation deck of Crossroads. The station was repaired, but the metal was forever slightly alien, warped on a quantum level by the bleed. It would never be quite right again. He looked out at the stars, a broker standing guard over his broken, perfect sanctuary. The Quill, by bending itself to the breaking point, had turned away the quartz. The truth of his species was not revealed in a grand victory, but in the terrifying, creative will that had forged a stalemate where none should have ever existed.